begun probably, wow. I began washing dishes when I was 16, and from there, like chopping parsley, peeling onions, and then a lot of laughter, a lot of love, a lot of friendship, and a fair amount of burns, blood, sweat, tears, and toil. Until 2008, when I ended up studying at the University of Gastronomic Sciences in Italy. And it was an enormously eye-opening experience for me, mostly because it was the first time in my life I ever recognized, books, yeah. Yeah, I liked them, actually, for the first time in my life when I went there. And if there's one thing that I kind of recognized from those 4 years, it was that, like, food systems and our food systems are all kind of evolved from this, like, intangible complex of nature and culture. And the systems themselves are actually really delicate and finely balanced and also vulnerable. And most of that bit of education was based on how to make things more resilient and more robust. So I'd like to ask this evening, basically, how we can increase the kind of resilience of our gastronomic systems and in order to kind of nourish humanity in all its glory, everywhere, in all different places, in all different situations. So, I work at a place called Nordic Food Lab, and my job kind of revolves around this kind of creative and quasi-scientific exploration of a seemingly nebulous term, that of deliciousness. And the aim might seem vague, but we recognize that kind of an infinity of choice can be paralyzing. And so by defining ourselves by geography, actually we give ourselves limitations, and through those limitations, then we find some degree of freedom. I'd like to talk today about, like, exploring edible biogeography, or looking into your own backyard and finding out what's edible, to find the possibility of foods that kind of speak honestly of their origin and honestly of their future, and foods which are sort of genuinely sustainable. And I think that that's a pretty important topic. So when I started looking into deliciousness, I thought it might be something kind of objective. I thought it might be something like the answer to, what do you want for your last meal? So what do you want for your last meal? It's quite often asked in kitchens, actually, because we all spend our time obsessing about food. And I think mine would be pasta and pesto. And that's been the case for the last 15 years, 20 maybe, and it's probably going to be the case for the rest of my life. I love this stuff. It's a weak point. But trying to find the ultimate in deliciousness, it was much, much more difficult. It's like a kind of much more difficult thing to pinpoint. So I wanted to start off with this, like, brief exercise. You know, I'd like you to take it, like, everyone just take a deep breath and relax, chill out, you know. And then I'd like you to imagine the most delicious food that you can, right? Imagine the thing that you really want to put in your mouth. So I want you to think about this food, you know, visualize it, and bring it up to your nose and smell it and feel your face engulfed by the aromas, and then, you know, you have this urge to, like, become one with the food, and eventually you put it in your mouth and you masticate and you salivate and it becomes lubricated, and then eventually you swallow. This kind of orgasmic rush goes to your head. It does with me. I don't know if that happens to everyone. But I want you to hold on to that food for a little second, and now imagine that you have to eat that food for every breakfast, every lunch, and every dinner for the rest of your life. It's really, really horrible, no? So basically the key is in keeping things diverse. Diversity at the lab is our starting point and our goal. It forms a kind of loop of feedback mediated by ecology and necessity and appetite. And there's no single food, or what we recognize more strongly than anything is there's no single food that can nourish us all completely. Like, the pursuit of good food in itself is the pursuit of biocultural diversity. So diversity of like indigenous, autochthonous genetic material, of species, of ideas, of cultural practices. These are all things that keep our world at its most robust, able to perpetuate itself indefinitely. So an exploration of the edible is in part, or actually maybe a lot more than just a part, an exploration of the natural world and its resources. And as we drive for a world where delicious food is not only desirable, but obtainable by everyone, we need to investigate not only species and their individual properties and everything else, but like where they sit within the ecological niches where they come from. So how do we encourage like a healthy ecology that gives rise to diverse foods, local foods, and just good quality stuff for everyone? So the first thing is there's no one solution. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to global food issues. So I give you all permission, if anyone talks about the food of the future, you have my permission to go and shoot them in the head. It just doesn't exist, okay? So, and the reason for that is we're diverse people, no? We come from diverse places. We're embedded in diverse ecological systems. But we have the same need to eat, but we don't have access to the same things. So clearly we need to embrace with working in complex systems, no? We need to encourage education, autonomy, and like strong decision-making abilities for diverse solutions in different situations. So kind of like one area that we're looking at quite a lot is insects. Go on. Did it go? It didn't go. There. Oh, that's a hissing cockroach. We had it for breakfast. It was disgusting. So, yeah, we're looking at this relationship, this culinary relationship between insects and humans. And, like they eat us and we eat them. And but we're also doing it to challenge preconceptions. It's very easy to be sensationalist about something like insects. It's a topic which kind of seems to rile up some primal disgust in a certain number of people. But what we're aiming to do is achieve some kind of well-integrated, holistic understanding of where these kinds of things fit into gastronomic systems. And also like how they can be made to be genuinely tasty. So it's a kind of, I would say, like a post-novelty entomophagy. Entomophagy is eating insects. So it's very complex to approach this subject, eating insects, especially here in the West, because everyone's a bit like about it. At the moment, we're carrying out studies on kind of like different species, where they live, how you process them, how indigenous people process them, their different uses, their habitats, their entire lives. But our entire lives could be spent studying one beetle, let alone humans. I mean, humans are notoriously difficult to research. And covering any kind of ecological or any ecological relationship between species is in its entirety is always impossible, actually. So our main focus, rather than concentrating on individual reactions between like this bug and this person, is more on creating delicious foods. Like by ignoring the details and actually going on this bigger concept of deliciousness, then we kind of strive to supply like culturally appropriate and delicious calories that are both nurturing and nourishing to both body and mind. For that, we need to explore how insects have been and are integrated into diets at all levels. And that means indigenous communities, that means suburban communities, urban centers, markets, street food. How are these things integrated? And this applies to insects. Okay, so I'm talking about insects, but really, this could apply to like any of this tree of life, So the point is that we can't just replace chicken or beef. It's not that easy. It's not that deterministic. We need to acquire this like complex understanding of foodstuffs and recognize the positions that they sit in ecology. is not about finding a chicken substitute. It's not about a protein percentage in a beef burger, but it's about celebrating insects for what they are and actually acknowledging the fact that we like them. And we eat too much meat anyway. Most of the world does. I mean, there's some areas of the world where they kind of could do with a bit more, but us, we eat too much meat. And insects could perhaps fill a certain part of that market with a considerably more sustainable protein than, say, beef. And I won't go into the whys, but, you know, they are very sustainable, or can be very sustainable to farm. Anyway, so if it's sustainability we're driving for, my point, I suppose, is that a simple kind of reduction in meat consumption would suffice. You don't need to kind of think about adding insects. That's not going to make anything more sustainable. To me, it's about exploring this whole massive world, this new world of like 1,900 different edible species. It's an enormous quantity of new ingredients for a radical neophile like me. So it's not impossible that within a few years, however many, in Europe and the West, we are eating insects and processing them in our homes. But that really depends on legislation, and it depends on how the supply chain develops. Obviously, that's not in place right now. And beyond it, to be honest, no one has a clue about insect consumption worldwide. Like the FAO have just published a massive report on insect consumption, but actual quantities are really unknown. And so to predict the future is virtually impossible. But to me, they do have a serious possibility of kind of increasing the future of sustainable food. And the main reason for that being that by eating insects, we're also recognizing delicious potential in a whole load of other foods with a high acceptance threshold, like starfish, for example. Starfish, jellyfish, weeds, oddly shaped vegetables, even offal. You know, and by eating things which have a high acceptance value, we're studying also how people's acceptance can change and how, I mean, think about sushi as an example. I mean, 20 years ago, eating raw fish was seen as kind of vile, and now you're a loser if you don't. So it's not about protein substitution, it's about diversifying. And if this project goes well, I really believe that it could be very beneficial to a lot of people and bring about positive effects on preservation of indigenous knowledge, revival of food cultures, celebration of taste diversity, as well as perhaps an increase in sustainability in industrial food systems. Now, we have to bear in mind that insects could also play a part in some kind of dystopian future where they're farmed on the cheapest agricultural land on the planet, they're fed antibiotics before they're sick, they're shipped to Europe, the protein is extracted and squeezed into chicken breast shapes before being sent off to parts of the world where chicken is an unaffordable luxury. We have to bear in mind that it's a possibility, it's every possibility. But it's a complex enough subject that we have to recognize that there's definitely positive parts. So we need to embrace them, you know, on the opportunity that it could be something really good for the world. So if we eat more of anything, you know, if we want to eat more of anything, we need to work out how to make you come back for a second helping. And so how do we do that? I mean, you give me an ingredient I've never seen before, and I need to process it. So how do I make you come back for seconds? So it's taste. It's taste driving the creative processes forward. Chefs and home cooks and any experienced people with food, you gain this understanding of what might and might not go well together. And so even on the first taste of a new ingredient, you can really quite successfully kind of gauge whether that's going to work well in one way or another. However, in an experimental kitchen, there can be no inhibitions of the creative faculties, no fear of failing. You know, in fact, in creating new foods, like genuinely innovative foods, you have to expect failure. I mean, you're going to get a lot more failure than anything else. So how do we work? We kind of work at the lab. We work very much on a kind of how do we say, like a sawn-off shotgun approach. Where, as the idea leaves the proverbial gun barrel, it sprays as wide as possible, So we try out as many ideas as possible. So maybe like 20 or 30 recipes in a day, some of which seem to make sense, others of which make less sense. But at the end of that, then we taste them all and try not to retch. And occasionally, like 1 or 2 of them are really, really good. And so these, out of 30, we might get 1 or 2 which make sense to continue with, and they'll pass on to like a second level of refinement and fine-tuning. There's some kind of like childlike innocence in this joy of uninhibited exploration as we attempt to learn about our culinary surroundings through playful exploration, essentially. It's very playful. Simultaneously, we draw from all kinds of different sources, so we get inspired by philosophers and myths. We get inspired by technology and science. All the time striving to attain this kind of hypothetical and quite possibly unobtainable level of delicious perfection. So, good foods are delicious. They increase food security. And they're intrinsically linked to sustainable agricultural practices. They're also accessible, and they're nutritious. Good food strives for simplicity, strives for integrity, and is both an expression of the geoclimatic origin where they came from, and a manifestation of thousands upon thousands of years of coevolution with our species. Driven almost entirely by flavor, we're constantly unearthing culinary practices which form a key link in sustainable food chains. So now as I find myself here on the stage, I feel it's a kind of obligation of mine to share this idea of the potency of diversity. And I hope that you'll all agree that that's something that we should commit to. And this is not a desire it's not a casual desire to experiment, but an urgent need to protect and promote a complex world of intangible cultural heritage and a complex ecology within which it sits. It's not about preserving ecological systems out with the human reality. This is about preserving and promoting ecological systems within which we're all deeply, deeply embedded. Diversity is a cloth by which we weave our fates together and upon which we can share our meals. Let us, all of us, be the catalysts of a new paradigm of food which protects and innovates on sustainable, health-giving, and spiritually rewarding, delicious foods for everyone. And I have no idea what's happening with the time because it still says 15 minutes.